Welcome to Tuesday Talks with Shawnee Lions Church. Each week we gather to discuss how being a follower of Jesus impacts our everyday lives. Whether you have been a believer for a long time or still have lots of questions about faith, we would love to have you join us as we embrace the joy of a transformed life. Welcome back to Tuesday Talks. Today I have Shane Kreitz with me, and I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Hello.
We are going to continue our conversation on our Honoring God series. Last week, Pastor Chris and I talked about honoring God with your time. Today, Shane and I are going to talk about honoring God with your entertainment. And next week, Pastor Daniel will be on and we'll be talking about honoring God with your finances. We've kind of taken this idea of stewardship and we've broken down into some major categories that impact our everyday life. And we're so thankful. We've had so many people reach out to us and say thank you that have been listening to the podcast. We're so thankful for your support. You can listen on iTunes, on Spotify, on Google Play, and on YouTube right now. So thank you for your support. Continue to share that. If you've been liking these episodes, please be sure to leave us a review, to rate the podcast, and to share with all your friends. When you do that, that helps us on these different platforms so that other people can hear this and hear these messages. And so we're so thankful for your support. But today, we are having a conversation on honoring God with our entertainment. So Shane, we've kind of been talking about this conversation. What does that mean to you, the fact that we honor God with our entertainment?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's one that I have to admit, I don't think I was very, judicious or insightful along these points. I when you started to ask me that and we prepared about this, I really had to start thinking it's not a question I ask myself very often. And so it got me stirring and thinking, what are the values I approach entertainment with? Mm-hmm. And as we go into this, it's funny, just the different scriptures we looked up and shared with each other and the different ideas. I wanted to make a point in all of this conversation, and this is both of our perspective, we're not here to place new rules on you. No. Or to say this is okay, that's not okay, but rather hopefully to ask some questions that really get you thinking.
Absolutely. That is a very important thing to consider. One of the things that really got me thinking on this topic was a quote I had seen on Pinterest many years ago, and it says this. It says, "I refuse to entertain myself with the things that my God went to the cross for."
So, not to jump too quickly on that question, mm-hmm. I refuse to entertain myself with things that my God went to the cross for. Mm-hmm. So, what stuck out to you about that?
Just the evolution of media and of social media and entertainment. There's so many things now that are just culturally acceptable that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, wouldn't have been acceptable. And the fact that it's just a joke, or it's just a movie. It's not really that big of a deal. And I think, kind of like what you said, is we're not here to put rules on it and to say that media is bad, because it's not. I mean, I think it's a beautiful way that God has equipped people and believers to influence our culture through movies, through entertainment, through books, whatever it is. The Lord has really done that. But also the idea that when you put garbage in, you get garbage out. Just like if you're eating junk food, if you're filling your mind and your heart with junk, that's what's going to come back out. So the idea of I'm not going to be feasting on stuff that God's actually trying to free me from, because it's only going to keep me in bondage or in yucky thinking.
Yeah. And I've certainly said this and thought this, and maybe some of our listeners are also thinking that, hey guys, you're really overplaying the effect that the stuff has on me. It doesn't make that big of a difference to me. And you might be speaking truth. For myself, I can say that I find that my sources of entertainment tend to have more of an effect on me than I realize. And let's think for a minute, historically, if you want to get into the history and all this of entertainment, go back to Shakespeare and the idea of what he did in the plays that we all had to read in high school and middle school. The idea was that he gave relief from the day-to-day monotony and drudgery of life to bring people some laughter so that there was color in life. And it was the sense of get away from reality, have some fun, and then go back to reality. And we carry that a lot of times. It's just music. It's just a movie. It's just a TV show. It's just a book. One thing that I had to realize as I even look back in last, let's say, 20 years of my life, I'm a huge music fan. As my former roommate from college, who is truly, he's an artist and truly understands music, he can probably is rolling his eyes at that statement, being like, Shane, you don't even remember the right words to songs, you make them up. But I do. I just love music. I'm always listening to something. And I had to realize there was one of my favorite bands. I won't say who they are because I don't want to make like a judgment call on this music, but I loved their stuff. And I had every album. And I noticed one time I was driving between New York and Lima. This is when I was in college. And I had listened probably for an hour to 2 different albums of this band. And I just was feeling depressed. Mm-hmm. And I thought, why am I feeling that? I mean, the sun was out. I was wherever I was going, I was in a good mood. And I realized, I think this music has an effect on me. And so I practiced a little bit. I was like, I'm not going to. I tested it some. And I would listen to other things. And then weeks later, I would listen to the same thing. And I would feel it again. Now, I know there's a great risk of self-fulfilling prophecy in that. But for me, it was just an indicator that what I listened to actually affects how I'm feeling. Yeah. Interesting thing about that, somebody once pointed out to me, a pastoral friend of mine who's now in missions he's doing different things across the world. In Ephesians chapter 5, I believe it is, God tells us to be very careful how we live, to be wise, making the most of time. And in that same paragraph, it says, with your mouths, with your intentions, sing songs to each other and psalms. And I've always thought, what a goofy thing to say. Like, who goes anywhere and sings to somebody else? Like, no one does that. But this friend of mine made a point. As Christians, as followers of Christ, as disciples, our faith is a singing faith. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, we can argue that back and forth, but the truth is that most church gatherings have a pretty significant time of music. Yeah. And for that, I think, as for me, as I connect the dots, it does affect how we think and how we feel.
Absolutely. Psalm 101, verse 3 says this. It says, I refuse to gaze on that which is vulgar. I despise what is evil and anything that moves my heart away from you. And I just think that is a really good verse and kind of clarifying what you're talking about of what we are spending our time with and what we're filling our minds and our hearts with. Like, it's either pulling us to Christ or it's moving us away from him. There really is no, it's not doing anything to me. That's not an option. And so just keeping ourselves accountable, myself included, of there is never a time when what I'm engaging in is not affecting me one way or another. It's either pulling me towards Christ or it's pulling me away from Christ. So how do we break this down into what are some of the things, and we'll kind of can both share this, what are some of the metrics or the things that you've worked out with God, or little heart checks that help you to make sure that you're making decisions, that you're filling your life with things that are pulling you towards Christ, not away from him?
Yeah. Well, and granted, comment on this, reply to it, and share what are your metrics, what are your thoughts, what are the things, your little statements, and let's recognize something here, that this is a grace-filled conversation. By no means are Bridgett and I telling you should adopt our rules. Mm-hmm. That's not the point. The point really, again, is to get you to ask questions of your own life and bring up conversations in your family and with your friends that can be of value in this regard. And I say that coming from the perspective where I can remember when I was in high school, my crew of friends, most of them went to a private Christian school, and I was the public school kid. And then in college, it got reversed. A lot of my friends and family went to state schools, and I went to the private Christian school. And I can remember in high school, the different rules that were on my friends. They weren't allowed to go to R-rated movies. They weren't allowed to dance. I remember going to they didn't have a senior prom. They had a senior banquet where we all sat around and ate, and that was the evening.
Leave room for the Holy Spirit.
That's right. It just funny stuff. And so I was always kind of the public school kid, right? Because, I thought that R-rated movies just meant really good movies. Mm-hmm. And then, in college, it's all reversed. And my brother went to Ohio University, and as Bridgett said, I went to Nyack College, which at the time I went to school had more stringent lifestyle guidelines than it did when Bridgett went to school there. And I can remember having a conversation with my brother, and he was saying, well, don't you do this and this and this? We just, every week. And I looked at him, no, I'd get kicked out. And he just looked at me like I was an alien, what? Are you even in college? Where, did you go to a convent or a monastery or something? And but at any rate, so we're not here to create a rule for you, but more to ask questions and consider things. But so for me, one of the things that I consider as one of my guidelines. And I break this. I'm not going to be Mr. Perfect in any of this conversation. But one of the questions I ask myself is, would I watch this or read this with my wife?
That's a good one.
Or would I watch this or read this or listen to this with my kids? Now, granted, there are things that I will watch and read and talk about with my wife that I wouldn't with my kids.
Yeah.
But those are questions for me that I just have to ask. Is this something that, and let me just admit, I have some interest in entertainment that aren't bad. They're just different. And like sailing is entertaining for me. Now, that's not something more I engage in as sport. My wife has no interest in that at all. So no, I would not do that with my wife. But videos that I watch, there's humor that maybe I find funny that she doesn't.
Yeah.
But then there are things that I find funny that she'll feel conviction over.
Yeah.
And not that I have to adopt her conviction, but I'm in a key relationship with her. Do I want that to influence our relationship?
Yeah. And that brings up a really good point about convictions. Because one of the things that one of our mutual favorite professors, Ron Walborn, taught us was, this concept of others may, but I may not. And that doesn't mean that others may murder and I may not murder, but there are just certain things, just because of our past, because of our wiring, that the Lord's boundary lines that He's given us is to say, like, this is just not a safe place for your heart, while it might be for somebody else. And so I don't know if I actually shared the story with you. I had a really beautiful encounter with the Lord a couple summers ago. And I woke up one morning and I could just feel this presence with me. And I'm like, okay, it doesn't feel like God. Like, it doesn't feel like Holy Spirit. Like, but it also doesn't feel demonic. Like, it doesn't feel yucky and oppressive. So I just asked the Holy Spirit, I'm like, Lord, like, what am I feeling? And He goes, he's like, that's the weight of your husband's prayers for you.
Whoa.
And I was like, whoa, like I've always thought about that. And
incidentally, just so we all know, Bridgett is not currently married.
Okay, thank you. This is not an advertisement. And so I just kind of, thought about that. And then later in the afternoon, the woman I was staying with had brought home a bunch of books that she was going to donate. And I was in like, oh, lovey-dovey, like Jesus told me my husband's praying for me mood. And so I picked up a Christian author of this Christian fiction romance book. It was like the farmer's daughter who married, the pastor or something. And
the Christian version of the princess marries the farmer's daughter.
I picked it up and the Lord said, no. He said, you will not trade your reality for fantasy.
Wow.
And he's like, I just told you that your husband's paying attention to this, and like this is dishonoring to him. And again, it wasn't like I'm reading some sexual book. It just, from my heart and what the Lord had asked me to do, like that was not okay. And so for me, that's a personal conviction. I don't read those books. I usually stay in the nonfiction category. There's nothing wrong with Christian fiction. But for me and for what the Lord had asked me to do in that season, like it wasn't okay.
You bring up, I know I'm kind of cutting in on you there, but
Sorry.
While you're not making that a rule for us, and thank you for that, there are two things that you say there that I think are significant as we evaluate and look at, look at how we're living. First, that the question of reality versus fantasy. If you think about this, the history of entertainment, the history of amusement, all the way back to, the Greek tragedies, but this was especially true with Shakespeare. The goal was to provide a relief, kind of an outlet, a step away from the drudgery of life with something funny. And sometimes we still look at it that way, that, reality is harsh and boring or hard or ugly, so we go to entertainment for a relief, and we don't connect the dots that, reality is a powerful place, but so are our fantasies.
Yeah. Talking of metrics, like that's one of my life statements is I will not partner with fantasy or falsehood. And so the idea that, I think it just goes back to that. I love that verse. I never really thought about it the other way, but like, is what I'm doing drawing my heart towards Christ or away from Christ? Now that doesn't mean that I'm not, anytime you watch a movie, most of the time the storyline is fake.
Right.
It's fiction. But is it some sort of material that's drawing me to Christ and what a future in Christ offers me, or is it pulling me the other direction? And so that's just been a huge thing for me.
And with that, let's just say for a second that that doesn't mean that, well, I'll speak for myself, knowing that, and I loosely will, I just have to admit, during this conversation, I wasn't all that clued into really what I wasn't all that analytical on what I was entertaining myself with. And so with this, that just makes me think, what Bridgett is not saying is that she watches and engages exclusively with Christian material and Christian media.
Yeah.
Like only Christian movies, only the Bible, only worship music.
Yeah.
And I would not say that standard for myself either. Again, I love music of many different genres.
That's right.
Okay. I should have stuck with it. Anyway, but then also, like, there are television shows that I find entertaining that are not necessarily Christian shows. There are movies where God has stirred my heart that came out of Hollywood, not out of the whatever we call the Christian version of Hollywood. And so, again, just to say, we're not making a rule here, and God can speak. God uses truth to speak. But the question remains, does it put you in a place where you're fantasizing about a life you're not living? Is it pulling you away from the Christ who loves you and died for you? Or is it giving you tools to engage in reality? And with that, is it drawing you closer to Christ, where you're seeing Him at work in your life, more grateful for the way that He's allowed the boundaries to fall in your life, or pulling you away from that? One of the things here, a topic of freedom, is that we are freed from things that enslave us, and we are freed to Christ. And for that matter, we are freed to become the person that Christ designed in the first place. You
said previously about honoring your wife, and I think that's really important. Is this something I'd watch around my spouse? I remember being in high school, and one of the questions on my youth group leaders had asked me is, would you watch this with Pastor? That was just something that really stuck with me. It's like, is this something I would be comfortable watching if other people were around, and just kind of having that metric. And that means I really love my movies are fine. I like them. I love TV shows. I love TV shows that like build stories and that you get to spend time with families or whatever. But there's been times where I'm like I am disappointed. I'm not going to say like I'm so happy about it. I'm like, I really wanted to know how this ended. But as the seasons went on, it got trashy, and I'm just not comfortable with it anymore. It's not something I want to be watching. And so the motivation behind it, like, am I using this to escape reality? Like, that's not okay, regardless of what it is. God is giving us space to be creative and to use our imaginations, but it's not an escape mechanism. Like, God doesn't escape, He delivers. And so I think that's kind of one of the questions. Like, would I be okay watching this, reading this, listening to this with other people around that I honor? Does this honor the person I'm becoming? Is this motivating me? Is this encouraging me? Is this okay for the boundary lines God's created? There was a couple months ago, there was a podcast that was floating around in Christian spheres. They were just debating some topics, and a couple of friends had posted it on Instagram and had sent it to me and said, hey, you really should listen to this. And I just responded. I said, I cannot listen to this from a non-defensive place, so I'm just going to choose not to listen to it. It was Christians having a conversation about some things that they wanted to discuss. I'm not saying that I agree with everybody that I listen to, but my heart just wasn't in a place where I could do that honoring them. Because if we're going to have disagreements, we need to do that with honor. And if you can't step into that place with honor, then you shouldn't be there.
Here's another thought. Something you said with that experience you had a couple summers ago when you sensed the presence and God speaking to you, and I kind of alluded to it as well. Entertainment is relational. It's not something we don't live in a vacuum. And it affects not only who we are, but how we relate with others. And I think of something, and I'm going to put myself, this is not Shane at his best. But one of the things that for entertainment for me, and it's also kind of a learning thing, I love to read, And I really love reading biographies and autobiographies. And part of that, someone once challenged me. I'm like, you're just a voyeur. You're just looking at other people's lives rather than living your own. And I received that counsel, but it wasn't exactly true for me. But I do have to be careful because while I love a good story, like Bridgett was saying, sometimes they aren't very beneficial to me. And so here's my confession. I just finished reading a biography on Johnny Carson. Now, Johnny Carson was the king of comedy for like 30 years or something. His life was not quite as beautiful as his monologue on The Tonight Show. And yesterday in our staff meeting, we were having just some great laughs together. And someone made a comment and a joke, and I said, I can tell that I've been reading this book about Johnny Carson because, like, some of his humor just from the book rubbed off on me, and I was like, I can't say the joke that's in my head. And so with that confession, I just have to say, and maybe you listeners, maybe you guys are all stronger and more forthright than I am, and things don't affect you in the way they do. But I just recognize my entertainment will affect me. And like with that, I had to realize, wait, now in that moment, I guarded myself. I didn't say the thing that was in my head, and I really didn't have anything all that way figured out. But just to recognize it had an effect on me.
And honestly, just thinking about, I'm about to talk with some teenagers in a couple weeks, and I've been thinking about like what wisdom would I share with them. And one of the biggest things is I look back on just decisions that I've made, and there definitely are things I wish I hadn't seen and things I wish I hadn't heard. And understanding now as an adult, like how much those things affected me. But like I said before, like God has lots of grace. And so I want you to know as a listener that as we've been talking, if this has kind of pulled on your heart a little bit, know that there's grace, and really asking the Lord, like, Lord, I need to renew my mind. Like I ask, Holy Spirit, that you would come into every place that I've entertained myself with false things or engaged in things that have drawn my heart away from you. Like I ask that you would restore my mind and clear my mind so that I can fill it with what's true. So you're not stuck, you're not bound with whatever it is. God is able and does want, and just because of who you have been or what you have done doesn't mean that you can't move forward into having a life that's calling you into who you're supposed to be.
That's right, because all of this is the process of who are you becoming. Bridgett mentioned that earlier. And, one of the things I think about, let's switch away from content and things of different kinds of entertainment. But, one of the things like, so one of the things that entertains me are like fail videos. You can watch these on YouTube for hours, or people falling down, or of, they make the cake and it looks like a landslide, not, a mountain or whatever. That's funny to me. But, the thing is, we've watched that with our sons sometimes because there's nothing inappropriate. It passes the metric. We can watch this with my wife. I can watch this with our kids. But then I notice that my sons are becoming people who like to laugh when people get hurt. Or they're becoming people who like to point out other people's flaws for the sake of humor. And that's the question, I think, when it comes down to it. If we're going to make any rule, any question, am I honoring myself? Am I honoring God? Am I honoring others? Am I becoming a person of honor with the entertainment that I watch? Because, yeah, sure, it's funny when someone falls down a flight of stairs. But it's not.
Yeah.
What kind of am I becoming a person who laughs at other people's misfortunes? And that's something that I've had to become really aware of with my young sons because, and they're kind of my metric. What do I want them to grow up like? And granted, I'm not in control over that exactly, but the question then becomes, who am I? Am I a person who honors others? Because there's a way to make people laugh, and there's a way to people that's genuine and and I think God is into belly laughs that you laugh so hard that you might tinkle, and you're hurting the next day. Your abs are sore. I think God is into that kind of laughter. Otherwise, why would he give us hippopotamuses or, just different things that are just goofy? Like why? But anyway, am I honoring others in that, or am I hurting others? Because, man, we can really go off the rails with that.
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful closing for today. Just a question to leave you with. Are the things that I'm entertaining myself with, are they honoring myself? Are they honoring others? Are they honoring God? And having those real conversations with ourselves of, God, where do I need to move this next step?
And what I believe with that is looking at those questions is not going to make us boring people.
Absolutely.
It is going to make us some of the most fun people to be around, because when others are with us, we are entertaining, but they don't walk away hurt. Mm-hmm. They walk away loved.
Amen. 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 Well, thank you so much for joining us this week, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to Tuesday Talks. If you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. For more episodes and further information, please visit ShawneeAlliance.com. See you next week.